The air tasted like ash and betrayal when Natalie Zimmerman walked into the barn behind her father's mercantile on that scorching August afternoon in 1882, expecting to find her fiancé checking on the new shipment of saddles, but instead discovered him with his tongue down her best friend's throat. Time crystallized into something sharp and cutting. Benjamin Hartford, the man she had promised to marry in 3 weeks, had Margaret pinned against the wooden slats, his hands tangled in her copper curls while Margaret's fingers clawed at his shoulders with the same desperation Natalie had witnessed 100 times before when Margaret wanted something that belonged to someone else. The worst part was not the kissing itself, though that felt like being trampled by wild horses. The worst part was the expression on Benjamin's face when he finally noticed her standing there, mouth agape, wedding veil measurements still clutched in her trembling hand. He looked annoyed. Not guilty, not ashamed, just inconvenienced that she had interrupted something he clearly considered more important than the promises he had whispered to her beneath cottonwood trees and star-filled Wyoming skies. "Natalie, this is not what it looks like," Benjamin started, releasing Margaret with such casual indifference that it made Natalie's stomach turn. Margaret at least had the decency to look embarrassed, her cheeks flushing scarlet as she straightened her disheveled dress. "Really?" Natalie heard herself say, her voice surprisingly steady despite the way her entire world was crumbling like dried mud under a wagon wheel. "Because it looks like my fiancé is kissing my best friend 3 weeks before our wedding." Benjamin ran a hand through his perfectly groomed blonde hair, that same gesture she had once found charming but now saw as the preening of a peacock. "You are being dramatic. Margaret and I were just talking and things got out of hand. It meant nothing." Margaret stepped forward, reaching for Natalie's arm with those delicate fingers that Natalie had held during childhood thunderstorms and adolescent heartbreaks. "Natalie, please, let me explain." Natalie jerked away as if burned. "Do not touch me, either of you, ever again." She turned and ran, not caring that half the town of Opal, Wyoming would see her sprinting down Main Street with tears streaming down her face, not caring that her mother would be mortified, not caring about anything except putting distance between herself and the 2 people who had just carved out her heart and thrown it in the dirt. She ran past the general store where Mrs. Henderson was sweeping the porch, past the saloon where piano music drifted through the swinging doors, past the church where she was supposed to become Mrs. Benjamin Hartford in 21 days. Her feet carried her to the only place that had ever made sense, the place where her father had taken her as a child when the world felt too big and too cruel. The stables at the edge of town belonged to Owen Carter, a cowboy who had drifted into Opal 5 years earlier and decided to stay, breaking horses and keeping to himself with the kind of quiet dignity that made people respect him even if they did not quite understand him. Natalie had known Owen peripherally the way everyone in a small town knows everyone else, but they had never exchanged more than pleasantries at church socials or brief conversations when her father did business with him. She collapsed against the stable fence, gasping for air that would not seem to fill her lungs properly, her vision blurred with tears and dust, and the hot August sun beating down mercilessly on the Wyoming prairie. The sound of her sobbing must have carried because within moments she heard footsteps approaching, boots crunching on the dry grass, and then a voice that sounded like whiskey and smoke and something indefinably gentle. "Miss Zimmerman, are you hurt?" She looked up through her tears to find Owen Carter standing a respectful distance away, his dark hair falling across his forehead beneath a battered hat, his brown eyes full of concern that seemed genuine in a way that made her want to cry harder. He was tall and lean with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent under the unforgiving sun, probably in his late 20s. And there was something about the way he held himself, careful and contained, that made her feel like she could shatter completely, and he would not judge her for it. "I am fine," she lied, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. Owen studied her for a long moment, then slowly approached and sat down on the fence rail beside where she stood, close enough to offer comfort but far enough to maintain propriety. "I have been around enough horses to know when something is spooked and hurting. You look like both." The kindness in his words broke something open inside her, and suddenly the whole story came tumbling out. Benjamin and Margaret and the barn, and the wedding that would not happen and the humiliation of it all. Owen listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail, his jaw clenching in a way that made the muscles in his neck stand out. When she finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a moment, staring out at the horizon where the mountains rose up like jagged teeth against the sky. Then he turned to her and said, "Some men do not know what they have until it is gone. Your Benjamin is a fool." It was a simple statement, delivered without flourish or dramatic emphasis, but something about the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made Natalie believe him. Not believe that she was better off, not yet, but believe that someone thought she deserved better. "The whole town will be talking," she said miserably. "My mother will be devastated. We already sent out the invitations, already ordered the food. My dress is finished." "Let them talk," Owen said with a shrug. "People in Opal will find something new to gossip about by next week. There is always a scandal or a shortage or a new family moving in. You will survive this." "How can you be so sure?" He smiled then, a small quirk of his lips that did not quite reach his eyes. "Because you ran here instead of collapsing in the street, because you are still standing. Because I can see it in you, that strength. You are like the wild mustangs I break. They do not realize how strong they are until something tries to cage them." Natalie found herself laughing despite everything, a wet, broken sound that was half sob. "Are you comparing me to a horse?" "I am comparing you to something beautiful and free that refuses to be broken," Owen corrected. "Take it as the compliment it is meant to be." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Natalie felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders, the tightness in her chest loosening just enough to breathe properly. There was something calming about Owen's presence, the way he did not try to fill every silence with empty words or false reassurances. "What will you do?" he asked eventually. "I do not know," Natalie admitted. "Go home, face my parents. Call off the wedding officially, I suppose, though I imagine Benjamin will try to spin some story that makes him look less like a scoundrel." Owen's expression darkened again. "If you need someone to stand with you to back up your version of things, I will do it. I know we are not close, but no woman should have to face that kind of humiliation alone." The offer surprised her. Owen Carter was known for keeping to himself, for avoiding town drama and social entanglements. For him to volunteer to wade into the messiest scandal Opal had seen in years meant something, though Natalie was not sure what. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with betrayal, and everything to do with the sudden awareness that Owen Carter was not just a kind stranger but a man, solid and real and looking at her like she mattered. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I have always thought you deserved better than Benjamin Hartford, even before today." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Before Natalie could figure out how to respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. She turned to see her father riding up on his gray mare, his face creased with worry. "Natalie, your mother and I have been looking everywhere for you. Mrs. Henderson saw you running through town crying." "What happened?" Natalie stood, squaring her shoulders, drawing on that strength Owen said he saw in her. "I caught Benjamin kissing Margaret in our barn. The wedding is off." Her father's face went through a rapid succession of expressions: shock, anger, protective fury, before settling into grim acceptance. "That yellow-bellied snake. Where is he? I will horsewhip him through Main Street." "Father, no," Natalie said firmly. "That will only make things worse. I just want to go home." Her father noticed Owen then, nodded a greeting. "Carter, thank you for looking after my daughter." "She did not need looking after," Owen replied. "She is handling things just fine on her own." Something in those words steadied Natalie even more. She mounted behind her father and let him take her home, but she looked back once before they rode away. Owen was still standing by the fence, watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher, and when their eyes met, he touched the brim of his hat in a small salute that felt like a promise. The next few days passed in a blur of humiliation and rage and grief. Benjamin had the audacity to show up at her parents' house with flowers and apologies, claiming that Margaret had seduced him, that he had been weak in a moment of temptation, that he still wanted to marry Natalie if she could find it in her heart to forgive him. Natalie's father chased him off the porch with a shotgun. Margaret sent letters that Natalie burned without reading. The town buzzed with speculation and judgment, some people sympathizing with Natalie, others suggesting she must have driven Benjamin into another woman's arms somehow. Through it all, Owen kept his distance but made his presence felt in small ways. He had flowers delivered to the house with no card, but Natalie knew they were from him because they were wildflowers from the prairie, not the cultivated roses Benjamin used to bring. He made sure her father got a good price on the new team of horses the mercantile needed. He was at church on Sunday, sitting in the back pew, and when Benjamin tried to approach Natalie after the service, Owen simply stood and moved to stand beside her family, his arms crossed, and his expression making it clear that Benjamin would have to go through him first. Benjamin, who was fundamentally a coward beneath his charming exterior, decided not to test that particular boundary. 2 weeks after the incident, Natalie was helping her mother can peaches in the kitchen when someone knocked on the door. Her mother went to answer it and returned with a puzzled expression. "Natalie, Mr. Carter is here to see you. He is waiting on the porch." Natalie wiped her hands on her apron and went outside, suddenly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way her stomach fluttered at the thought of seeing Owen. He was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, holding his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Miss Zimmerman," he said formally, "I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride. I have a mare I have been training, sweet-tempered thing, and she needs someone to help her get used to longer distances. Thought you might enjoy getting out of town for a few hours." It was clearly an excuse, a flimsy one at that, but Natalie found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "I would like that. Let me change into my riding clothes." 20 minutes later, they were heading out into the open prairie, the town of Opal shrinking behind them as the horses settled into an easy canter. The August heat had broken slightly, a hint of the coming autumn in the breeze that carried the scent of sage and grass. Natalie felt something ease inside her with every mile they covered, the weight of scandal and heartbreak lifting like morning fog burned away by the sun. Owen led them to a creek that wound through a small canyon, cottonwood trees providing shade and the sound of running water offering a peaceful counterpoint to the stillness of the prairie. They dismounted and let the horses drink while they sat on a flat rock overlooking the water. "Thank you for this," Natalie said. "I have felt like I was suffocating in town, everyone staring, whispering." "I figured as much," Owen said. "When I first came to Opal, I was running from something too, not a broken engagement, but a past I did not want to face. I spent a lot of time out here, away from people. It helped." "What were you running from?" The question was bold, possibly too personal, but Owen did not seem offended. "A war that did not end just because the fighting stopped," he said quietly. "I was 16 when I lied about my age and joined up in 78, fought in some of the last conflicts with the Cheyenne. Saw things no one should see, did things I am not proud of. When my enlistment was up, I could not go back to my family's farm in Kansas. Could not pretend to be the same person I was before. So I drifted until I found Opal, and something about this place made me want to stop drifting." Natalie processed this information, seeing Owen in a new light. The quietness she had always attributed to shyness or aloofness suddenly made sense as something deeper, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen gentleness anyway. "I am sorry," she said. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Owen acknowledged. "But it taught me what matters and what does not. Town gossip does not matter. What people think of you does not matter, not really. What matters is knowing who you are and living with integrity. You have that, Natalie. Benjamin does not, never did. That is why he will end up miserable and you will end up happy, once you give yourself permission to move forward." "You called me Natalie," she said, surprised. They had always been formal with each other before. He looked at her with those brown eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "Is that all right?" "Yes," she said softly. "It is all right. You can call me Natalie. Then you should call me Owen." They talked for hours, sitting by that creek, the conversation flowing easily in a way it never had with Benjamin. Owen told her about breaking horses, the satisfaction of earning an animal's trust through patience rather than force. Natalie told him about her dreams of seeing more of the world, of maybe teaching school someday, instead of just helping in her father's mercantile. With Benjamin, she had always felt like she needed to make herself smaller, more agreeable, less ambitious. With Owen, she felt like she could expand to fill all the space her dreams required. The sun was beginning to set when they finally rode back toward Opal, the sky turning that particular shade of purple that only seemed to exist in Wyoming. As they neared town, Owen slowed his horse to a walk, and Natalie matched his pace. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Not just at church or around town, but like this, properly." Natalie's heart hammered in her chest. "People will talk. They will say I moved on too quickly, that I am scandalous." "Let them talk," Owen said, echoing his words from 2 weeks earlier. "Or we can be discreet for a while if you prefer. I do not care about the timeline, Natalie. I just want to spend time with you. I have wanted that for longer than you probably realize." "How long?" she asked, curious. He smiled, that small smile she was beginning to recognize, beginning to treasure. "Since the church social 3 years ago, when you argued with Reverend Thompson about women's suffrage and did not back down even when he got red in the face. I thought to myself, now, there is a woman worth knowing." 3 years. Natalie could not keep the surprise from her voice. "Why did you never say anything?" "You were courting Benjamin," Owen said simply. "I am not the kind of man who interferes in another man's relationship, even if I thought you were making a mistake. But now you are free, and I will be damned if I let another day pass without at least trying." The honesty in his words, the quiet conviction, made Natalie's decision easy. "Yes," she said. "I would like to see you again, properly, and I do not care if people talk. I have already survived the worst scandal Opal has seen in a decade. What is a little more gossip?" Owen's face lit up with genuine happiness, transforming his usually serious expression into something that made Natalie's breath catch. "Tomorrow, then. I could pick you up after church. We could have lunch by the creek again." "Tomorrow," Natalie agreed. They rode into town together as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and if people noticed and whispered, Natalie found she genuinely did not care. She had spent so much energy trying to be the perfect fiancé, the perfect daughter, the perfect friend to Margaret. She was done with perfect. She wanted real, and Owen Carter, with his scarred hands and haunted eyes and fundamental decency, was the most real thing she had encountered in a very long time. The next 3 months passed like a dream, like waking up from a nightmare to discover that reality was actually better than what you had been settling for. Owen courted her with a patience and thoughtfulness that made her previous relationship seem like a pale imitation of love. He brought her books he thought she would enjoy, remembered details from conversations they had weeks earlier, listened to her opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and never once suggested she should think smaller or want less. They spent every Sunday afternoon together, riding out to the creek or exploring the foothills of the mountains that ringed Opal. Owen taught her things he had learned from the Cheyenne during his army days, before the fighting started, which plants were edible, how to read weather patterns in the clouds, the names of constellations in languages he had picked up from other soldiers. Natalie taught him things too, how to dance properly instead of the rough saloon shuffling he knew, bits of French her mother had taught her, the complicated social dynamics of small-town Wyoming that he had always ignored but now needed to navigate as her suitor. Benjamin tried to cause trouble at first, spreading rumors that Natalie had been secretly seeing Owen all along, that her accusations of infidelity were just an excuse to trade up. But the timeline did not support his lies, and more importantly, people liked Owen. He was respected for his skill with horses, his quiet strength, his unwillingness to engage in the petty feuds that sometimes consumed small towns. When Benjamin got drunk at the saloon and started running his mouth, it was not Owen who shut him down but a group of other ranchers and cowboys who told him to shut up or get out. Margaret left Opal in September, moving to Cheyenne to live with an aunt, and Natalie felt nothing but relief. Some betrayals could not be forgiven, some friendships could not be salvaged. She mourned the girl Margaret had been before ambition and jealousy twisted her into someone unrecognizable, but she did not miss the woman Margaret had become. In October, Owen asked her father for permission to court her officially, a formality since everyone in town already knew they were together, but one that mattered to Owen's sense of honor. Her father, who had always been lukewarm about Benjamin, gave his enthusiastic blessing. Her mother, more practical and worried about appearances, took longer to come around, but even she had to admit that Owen treated Natalie with a respect and care that Benjamin never had. The night Owen asked her to marry him was unremarkable in the best possible way. They were sitting on her parents' porch in early November, wrapped in blankets against the first real cold of winter, watching snow begin to fall in lazy spirals. Owen had been quiet all evening, fidgeting in a way that was unlike him, and Natalie was about to ask if something was wrong when he suddenly turned to her and took her hand. "I am not good with fancy words," he said. "I know I should probably have some kind of speech prepared, something romantic. But all I can think to say is that you make me want to be better than I am. You make me remember why I survived the war, why I kept drifting until I found someplace worth staying. I love you, Natalie. I think I have loved you for years, even when I had no right to. Will you marry me?" He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple gold with a small turquoise stone, nothing fancy but somehow perfect. Natalie looked at the ring, then at Owen's anxious face, then back at the ring, and started laughing, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she said when she could speak again. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you too. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day at the stables when you told me I was strong. You saw me when I could not see myself." Owen slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promise. The snow continued to fall, covering Opal in white, and Natalie thought about how 6 months ago she had been planning a wedding to the wrong man. How betrayal had felt like the end of everything, but turned out to be the beginning of something infinitely better. They married in December, a small ceremony in the same church where Natalie was supposed to have married Benjamin. Only close family and friends attended, and Natalie wore a different dress, one her mother made specially, simpler than the elaborate gown that still hung in her closet. Owen wore his best suit and could not stop smiling, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared made several of the older ladies fan themselves and whisper about indecency. But Natalie could not bring herself to care. The wedding breakfast was held at her parents' house, and her father gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. "I thought my daughter was getting married last August," he said. "Turned out she was supposed to be getting married in December all along." Sometimes the wrong road leads you exactly where you need to be. To Natalie and Owen, may they have the wisdom to recognize the good fortune they found in each other. Owen and Natalie moved into a small house on the edge of town, close enough to Owen's stables that he could handle emergencies, but far enough from Main Street to have privacy. It was not much, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. They spent the first winter as newlyweds learning each other's habits, cooking meals together, reading by firelight, making love with the kind of passion that comes from genuine connection rather than obligation. Natalie started teaching school that spring of 1883 when the previous teacher got married and moved away. She loved it, loved shaping young minds and making a difference beyond just helping in her father's store. Owen supported her completely, never suggesting she should give it up when she got pregnant that summer, never implying that her place was exclusively in the home. He was proud of her accomplishments, bragged about his brilliant wife to anyone who would listen, and that pride made her love him even more. Their daughter was born in February of 1884, during one of the worst snowstorms Opal had seen in years. The doctor almost could not make it through the drifts, and Owen ended up delivering his own daughter with coaching from Natalie's mother, his hands shaking but steady when it mattered most. They named her Clara, after Owen's mother who had died when he was young, and she had Natalie's blonde hair and Owen's brown eyes and lungs that could wake the entire town when she wanted to nurse. Benjamin Hartford married a girl from Cheyenne that same year, a shallow little thing with money and no backbone. Natalie heard through town gossip that he was already stepping out on his wife, and she felt nothing but pity for the girl who had not learned what Natalie had learned. That charm without character would always curdle into cruelty eventually. The years passed in the way years do when you are happy, quickly but full of moments worth remembering. Owen's business grew as his reputation for training horses spread throughout Wyoming and into neighboring territories. Natalie continued teaching until their second child came along in 1886, a boy they named Thomas after her father. She took a few years off to focus on the children but went back to teaching part-time once both kids were old enough for school themselves. They bought more land, built a bigger house, added onto the stables. Owen hired help, a young man named Sam who reminded him of himself at that age, drifting and looking for purpose. Natalie started a lending library in Opal, collecting books and sharing them with anyone who wanted to read, including several women who had never learned how and whom she taught in quiet afternoon sessions at the church. In 1889, Owen's past caught up with him in an unexpected way. A Cheyenne man came to Opal looking for him, and Owen went pale when he saw him. Natalie learned that during the war, Owen had helped several Cheyenne families escape before a particularly brutal attack, going directly against orders and risking court-martial. The man, whose name was Yellow Horse, had been a child then and wanted to thank Owen for saving his life and the lives of his mother and sisters. It was a piece of Owen's history he had never told Natalie about, shame over participating in the war making him reluctant to also claim credit for the good he had done. "You saved people," Natalie said that night after Yellow Horse left. "You saw injustice and you fought against it, even when it was dangerous. Why would you hide that?" "Because I should have done more," Owen said. "I should have refused to fight at all, saved more people, done something sooner." "You were a child yourself," Natalie reminded him. 16, and lied to about what you were signing up for. You cannot carry guilt for a war you did not start. You can only be responsible for your own actions, and your actions were honorable when it mattered most. Owen cried that night, the first time Natalie had ever seen him break down completely, years of survivor's guilt and shame pouring out. She held him and let him grieve and loved him through it, the way he had loved her through her own heartbreak years earlier. Marriage, she had learned, was not about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone whose damage fit with yours, whose strengths compensated for your weaknesses, who saw you clearly and loved you anyway. Their third child, another girl they named Rose, came along in 1890, and their fourth and final child, a boy named Henry, arrived in 1893. The house was chaos, full of noise and laughter and the constant demands of raising 4 children, but it was a happy chaos. Owen was a devoted father, patient in ways that surprised people who only knew his stern public demeanor. He taught his sons to ride and his daughters too, refusing to accept that girls should be limited in their skills. Natalie made sure all their children learned to read early and well, valuing education as the key to opportunity. Opal changed around them, growing from a rough frontier town to a more established community. Indoor plumbing arrived, then electric lights, then telephone lines. The century turned, Wyoming became a state, women got the right to vote. Through it all, Owen and Natalie remained fixtures of the community, respected and admired for their integrity, and their love story that had started with betrayal and become something legendary. On their 20th wedding anniversary in December of 1903, Owen surprised Natalie with a trip. They left the children with her parents, now elderly but still sharp, and took the train to San Francisco, something Natalie had always dreamed of doing. They spent a week in the city, seeing the ocean for the first time, visiting museums and theaters and restaurants that served food from a dozen different countries. It was magical, that week, like being young and newly in love all over again without the uncertainty that had shadowed their early courtship. On their last night in San Francisco, walking along the beach at sunset, Owen took Natalie's hand and said, "Do you ever think about how things might have been different? If you had never caught Benjamin with Margaret, if you had married him instead?" Natalie considered the question seriously, watching the waves crash against the shore. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I think I would have been miserable. I think eventually I would have figured out who he really was, and by then I would have been trapped. What we have, Owen, what we built together, that is worth every moment of heartbreak it took to get here. I would not change anything." "Good," Owen said. "Because I was thinking in that barn 7 years ago when you caught them, Benjamin proved he did not know what he had. But I did. I saw you running down the street, crying and broken, and I thought, if I ever get the chance to be the man who earns her trust, who makes her happy, I will do everything in my power not to waste it. I hope I have lived up to that." "You have exceeded it," Natalie said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "You have given me a life better than any dream I could have conjured. You saw my strength when I felt weak. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You built a home with me, a family, a partnership. You are the best man I have ever known, Owen Carter, and I fall more in love with you every single day." They stood on that beach until the sun disappeared completely, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of betrayal and built something unshakable. Behind them, the city lights began to glow. Ahead of them, the ocean stretched into darkness, full of unknown depths and possibilities. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of their joined hands, their shared heartbeat, their absolute certainty in each other. When they returned to Opal, their children rushed to greet them, full of stories about everything that had happened in their absence. Clara was 17 now, already being courted by the Methodist minister's son, a kind young man who reminded Natalie of Owen. Thomas was 15 and working part-time at the stables, learning his father's trade. Rose was 13 and wanted to be a doctor, an ambition that raised eyebrows but which Owen and Natalie encouraged wholeheartedly. Henry was 10 and obsessed with trains, drawing elaborate maps of railway lines that did not yet exist, but which he insisted would be built someday. Life continued its forward momentum, as life does. Clara married her minister's son in 1906 and gave Natalie and Owen their first grandchild the following year. Thomas took over more of the stable operations as Owen's body began to feel the accumulated aches of a lifetime of hard work. Rose did become a doctor, attending medical school in Chicago and returning to Opal to establish the town's first real clinic. Henry became an engineer and helped build railways across Montana and the Dakotas, coming home to visit several times a year with increasingly tall tales about his adventures. In 1912, Natalie's father passed away peacefully in his sleep, and the grief was profound but bearable, softened by gratitude for the long life he had lived and the support he had always given her. Owen held her through the funeral and the difficult weeks after, repaying the comfort she had given him so many times. Her mother followed 2 years later, and Natalie and Owen inherited the mercantile, which they sold to a young couple just starting out, preferring to focus on their own businesses and their growing number of grandchildren. The years were kind to them in many ways and cruel in others, as years always are. They watched the world change dramatically, cars replacing horses, airplanes taking to the skies, wars erupting in Europe that seemed impossibly far away but sent ripples even to rural Wyoming. Through it all, they had each other, constants in a changing world. In the summer of 1922, 40 years after that terrible day in the barn that turned out to be the best terrible day of Natalie's life, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around. 8 grandchildren now, ranging from ages 15 down to 2. Chaos incarnate but beloved. The party was held at their house, the big one Owen had built in 1895 with room for everyone, and there was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Owen was 62 now, his dark hair gone silver, his face lined with decades of weather and worry and joy. Natalie was 59, her blonde hair faded to white gold, her hands marked by age but still capable. They danced together as the sun set, moving slowly to a waltz Clara's husband played on his violin, and Natalie rested her head on Owen's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and leather and sage. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his lips close to her ear. "I am thinking about the day we met," Natalie said. "Really met, not just polite hellos at church. I was so broken, Owen. I thought my life was ending. And you told me I was strong, that I was like a wild Mustang that refused to be broken. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Owen said. "It was the day everything changed. The day I stopped being content to watch you from afar and decided to take a chance." "I am glad you did," Natalie said. "I am glad Benjamin was an idiot who did not know what he had. I am glad Margaret was selfish enough to show me who he really was before I married him. I am glad for every twist of fate that led us to that barn and that conversation and this life we built. I would not trade a single moment of it." "Not even the hard parts?" Owen asked. "The years when money was tight, when Thomas broke his arm falling off that horse, when Rose left for medical school and you cried for a week." "Not even those," Natalie confirmed. "The hard parts are what make the good parts matter. We earned this, Owen. This family, this love, this life. We chose each other every single day for 40 years, and that means something." Owen pulled back slightly to look at her face, his brown eyes still clear and sharp despite his age. "I will keep choosing you for however many years we have left," he said. "Every day, Natalie. You are still the wild Mustang who refused to be broken, and I am still the cowboy lucky enough to earn your trust." They kissed there on the porch while their family danced and laughed in the yard, and somewhere in the back of Natalie's mind, she thought about that younger version of herself, 22 and devastated and convinced her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, the love and the life, and the absolute rightness of choosing the quiet cowboy over the charming liar. But maybe she would not, because maybe not knowing was part of the journey, part of the trust required to take that leap into the unknown. The party continued late into the night, and when everyone finally went home or settled into the various bedrooms for sleeping, Owen and Natalie sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain air, watching stars wheel overhead in patterns they had memorized over decades. "Some men do not know what they have," Owen said suddenly, echoing his words from 40 years earlier. Natalie smiled. "And some men do. You always knew, Owen. From the very beginning you saw me clearly and loved what you saw. That made all the difference." "You made all the difference," Owen corrected. "You took a chance on a broken-down cowboy with more past than future. You built me into someone worth being, someone who could be a good husband, a good father. You did that, Natalie." "We did that together," she said firmly. "That is what marriage is, Owen, building each other up, being each other's strength when the world gets heavy. We have been doing it for 40 years, and I want 40 more. I will give you every day I have left," Owen promised and sealed it with a kiss. They lived those days fully, gratefully, aware that time was precious and finite. Owen passed first in his sleep in 1927 at the age of 67. His heart simply stopped beating one night, and Natalie woke to find him at peace beside her. The grief was immense, an ocean she had to learn to navigate, but it was tempered by gratitude for the 45 years they had shared. She did not wear black for long, knowing Owen would have hated that. Instead, she wore colors and kept living, kept teaching part-time, kept being involved with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who started arriving in the early 1930s. She lived to be 91, sharp and engaged until the very end, passing away in 1954 surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Owen had created. In her final moments, her daughter Clara holding one hand and her son Thomas the other, Natalie smiled and whispered, "Tell your father I am coming home." They buried her next to Owen in the Opal Cemetery on a hill overlooking the town they had called home for over 70 years. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates and a single line Natalie had requested years earlier. He knew what he had. The story passed into town legend, told and retold at church socials and community gatherings. The woman who caught her fiancé kissing her best friend, and the cowboy who saw her value when she could not see it herself. The love that started in a stable and lasted until death parted them, and perhaps beyond. Young women in Opal would visit the grave when they faced heartbreak, drawing strength from the idea that betrayal could lead to something better, that the wrong person leaving your life made room for the right person to enter. And somewhere beyond the reach of time and memory, perhaps Owen and Natalie found each other again, two souls recognizing their perfect match, ready to dance through eternity together with the same certainty that had defined their earthly marriage. Because some love stories end when the lovers die, but others become immortal, woven into the fabric of a place and a people. Reminders that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the doorway to the best days waiting just ahead.